that the chemical 1,2,3-trichloropropane has been known and identified by the good people who work in the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection as a carcinogen for some time. And while it's been under a testing program as a possible contaminant, private wells all over New Jersey have been tested. We found this chemical at various levels across the state. That national scientific organizations which study research, such as our Department of Environmental Protection, the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C., the National Toxicology Program, looked at this chemical and determined that it's carcinogenic and that it actually can involve itself with changing and affecting the very genes which control our bodies. The fact of that means that we have to begin to regulate this chemical, set a maximum limit for its presence in our drinking water, and bring the protection of regulation to our citizens of New Jersey who, of course, depend on a clean drinking water supply for life.
Generally speaking, what do you hope to accomplish with this legislation?
Well, the bill will cause the body which recommends contaminants to New Jersey DEP to make a recommendation to regulate 1,2,3-TCP, and once that and direct then New Jersey DEP to set this maximum concentration limit and begin to require water companies, townships, and others who are running water operations to test for this particular chemical. You know, there's a broad testing regime and limits for many things which are currently found in groundwater and runoff water and other sources of water that we drink. And this chemical, because of its nature as a carcinogen, needs to be on a list of chemicals that are tested for on a routine basis across our state. I certainly want to mention that my colleague and I, Troy Singleton, are co-sponsors in this legislation. We will be speaking to our colleagues in the legislature about joining us in supporting this legislation. Communities across the state are impacted by this, and they will want to ensure, to take steps to ensure the safety of their residents, just as I am doing here as a resident of Moorestown and as a legislator who listens to his constituents, who have done a great job in bringing this issue to my attention, to the attention of our staff, so that we can get about doing other people's business. In this case, it is making sure that our drinking water is as clean as it can be. Just, I think it's important to comment and to note that legislation often comes about because of the active involvement of citizens who use our current laws to get information and to investigate that information, and then they go to their local government, they go to the legislator, they go to the congressman, and they say, there ought to be a law. We need protection from this. We need to make a change in the way we are regulating, the way we're governing, and that's what is at the basis of the legislation I'm presenting to you today. It comes about because of the active involvement of citizens who live here, who use the ability to get information from their government and to take steps to advance the interests of themselves and their families. That's very important. Now, in thinking about that process, I think one of the things that we may wish to do, in fact that we will do, in thinking about this legislation and the process of getting information, I think citizens ought to have as easy access as we can provide to the information about their drinking water. I don't know that it's not the easiest thing in the world to file an open request, to figure out how to get information. I think you ought to be able to walk into your township building, into your water department, and say, what are the latest tests given to me? I want to see them. After all, it's my health, it's the health of my children, and you shouldn't be having to file paperwork and having to do this. You're a citizen of the country, you're a citizen of the township, you're a user of that water, and the process for obtaining information about what you were drinking, what you're putting into your own body, into the bodies of your children, your loved ones. You want to be able to get access to the information without having to do it.
Why Moorestown?
Moorestown, because constituents such as Mike Babcock here and our council person have been involved in this issue and called up their legislator and said, we have an issue we want you to take an interest in. We have a concern about health and safety here. We need the state government to act. And one of the I think it's important to note here too is that the good people in the New Jersey DEP have been looking at this chemical for some time. The federal government has been looking at this chemical for some time. In fact, I was reviewing last night a letter that former DEP Commissioner Ms. Jackson and Governor Corzine sent to the EPA asking for limits for regulation on this chemical because it's been known for some time that this chemical 1,2,3-TCP is a carcinogen, and so I don't know how often, how many times you have to say it. This chemical is potentially dangerous, and we want to remove it from our drinking supply. Or certainly set limits, safe limits for it in our drinking supply. You don't know what's going on if you don't measure it, you don't study it, you don't test for it. Then you don't know what your exposures are. And this chemical has been studied and shown to be potentially dangerous. We need to get it out of our water supply, or at least know what's going on, reduce it to correct limits, to acceptable limits.
Where do you go from here in terms of this issue?
Well, to gather public support for it, to get the attention of our Senate colleagues, so that we begin to move this bill through the legislature. I think there's a lot of evidence out there in the department, hopefully, as this bill moves forward. Folks who work there will be able to come forward and to offer information on this. We'll certainly have members of the public who I think will come and express their concern that the government act in this area. And I hope that, and I would expect, quite frankly, that my colleagues across the state will recognize what we're trying to do here and join in an effort to get this carcinogen regulated.
Many municipalities don't even test for this. How do you, does this legislation address that?
Well, we'll require that.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, the reason we know about the chemical here is because the DEP, under a federal program, federal guidance, sort of has been doing spot testing for contaminants which might potentially be ripe for regulation. And I think it's called the contaminant candidate list, the candidate contaminant list, CCL. And there are tens of chemicals on that are routinely spot tested, not only here in New Jersey but across the country. And they're studied, their levels are studied, toxicology reports are generated on them, so that appropriate authorities can make a decision to regulate this chemical or not regulate this chemical. Is it important enough, prevalent enough that we have to take action? Chemical has reached that threshold, has reached the threshold where it needs to be regulated, and this is what we will attempt to do with this legislation.
Are you concerned about the water safety in Moorestown, given the results of these findings?
Well, Moorestown is fortunate to have multiple sources of water, and one of the action was taken to close this wellhead to make sure that the water that the folks of Moorestown are drinking don't contain this contaminant. So again, we're fortunate many municipalities have multiple sources of water upon which they can draw. If there's a problem with one wellhead or one source, they can draw from another source, buy water from a non-contaminated source. But that process, of course, can't take place if we don't know what's in the ground, and that's what this bill will do. We'll know what's in the ground, at least with respect to this chemical, and begin to take actions, regulatory actions, to protect the public from it. I am fortunate to be joined by our committeeman here in Moorestown, Greg Newcomer, who has been working on this issue for some time, and who has comments on this issue as well.
Greg, can you speak to that issue?
Sure. I'm interested in what the source point of the contamination from 1,2,3-TCP is. trichloropropane does not belong in our water, and I would like to find out where it came from and what we can do about it. I think that's an important thing for public health to do as soon as possible.
What do you think of the findings? This was known about for a year. They applied, and then they were denied to the state. How do you feel about that?
Well, I understand there was an application for a spill fund. To me, if that was that important, there was an application for a spill fund, we should look into why it is that important. Also, if the DEP advised us to close wells 7 and 9 in the town, we should continue to test to make sure those wells have not raised in their level of this contaminant. The contaminant is about cancer. No one I know thinks that something that involves cancer should continue. It's kind of simple as that. We need to find out why this contaminant was put in the water, what we can do to stop it, and what action plan we have to go forward to do that.
Do you feel the town wasn't doing that?
I am wanting to have a meeting in regards to those answers. The last town council meeting was canceled. I was not actually consulted about that being canceled. I hoped to discuss this at that last town council meeting that was canceled October 20th.
Where do you go from here?
I would hope that where we go is that we find out first where the chemical came from, second, how we can remove it from our water and what the best action plan is, and third, to keep the population, the constituents, the residents, taxpayers of Moorestown informed in our progress all along the way.
Good. Back pop
Yeah, I think the legislature.
Just 1 second, Mike, please. Say your name, just so
Michael Babcock, resident in Moorestown. I believe that the legislation is important, and especially in our case here in Moorestown, because of the lack of legislation. It didn't seem important enough at the time of the discovery to actually move upon it, learn where it came from, to do anything, and that's ultimately why we got denied with this application, because they waited for over a year to actually apply for funds from the state, which would have paid for the cleanup. If it became regulated, towns would have to act upon it a little bit sooner, because it would be law. They wouldn't be able to kind of shrug it off and hope that it maybe goes away by itself, because it is a man-made contaminant. It is a carcinogen. Obviously, all the studies for the last 15 years. I don't want my kids drinking it, and I can't imagine that anyone else, and at least in this town, will want their kids drinking it as well. So I believe that I got to thank Mr. Conaway for taking my information and actually running with it, and maybe hopefully getting some legislation passed to actually do something about it. And I think they should do something about it across the whole country, because apparently it's not a New Jersey thing, it's not a Moorestown thing, it's a national thing.
You were persistent with your looking into this matter. Oh, well, why?
Because initially, my wife and I were both upset about it, and she had tried to obtain information from our township. I said, open access to information and records, particularly our drinking water, which is basic life sustainability, not just here, but globally. And people aren't giving us information on what we give to our kids. We would definitely want that, especially with the knowledge that we have 3 kids. We have a 2-year-old that has some issues herself, and how do we know that this wasn't a contributing factor to that? I mean, they just tested for it beginning of 2013. We could have been drinking it, all of us could have been drinking it the whole time we've been living here, not even known it until now. So I, for one, don't want to drink it anymore, and I don't know the effects of it. I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure there's the good people at DEP who have done this extensive research that have all this information. They could provide it, and they can give all the answers, and maybe all their work won't be for no reason at all. It's just sitting in some files in a computer somewhere. So maybe legislature will give an opportunity to actually listen to them and do something about it.
On that, I mean, New Jersey is rightly particularly sensitive on these issues. We have, a long industrial past. We are a farming community. This particular chemical is used in the manufacture of other chemicals used in industrial processes. It is used as a fumigant and a nematode killer on farmland. It is infused into the ground, it turns into a gas, it kills various things like weeds and other things which are important in farming. But that process allows this chemical to get into the groundwater. Manufacturing processes often produce as byproducts chemicals which get into our groundwater, go into the air, and aerosolized concentrations that irritate into the eyes and to the mouth. In the groundwater, as you look at studies that the National Toxicology Program has done, it is shown to cause a cancer in both male and female rats at concentrations that humans may, in fact, be exposed to in their drinking water. So, this is a chemical of concern. It is known to have been a concern, and it's important that we take action to remove it from our water supply. I'm committed to doing that. I know the residents here are committed to doing that, and I think as we bring attention to this issue across the state, other my colleagues and working on behalf of people they represent, we want the government to take action to remove this from our water supply. We need to make sure that process, by the way, just in general, needs to be opened up, and the public needs to understand what it is they're drinking, what is vital. You need it to live. Air, water, you can't get very far without them. And we want to make sure that the water that you drink, in this case, the air that you breathe, is as healthy as we can make it. It is really essential to life, and it is certainly one of the responsibilities of government.
So some critics have said this is just a political issue. You don't believe that?
Well, government takes action, and so I guess there is some politics in it. I have to go talk to my colleagues. I have to let them know about the about this chemical and why it needs to be regulated. Is that a political process? I'll leave it to the public to decide about that. Timing, things come to fruition as they come to fruition. I had to understand the issue. I had to have staff research the issue. If we had waited till next year, what would the public say? We're acting and bringing this to the public's attention today because we're ready to move today. And if we were to decide to change because there's an election coming, wouldn't that be politics? So it is. We're moving as quickly as we can responsibly move forward on this issue. That's what we've always done. We'll continue to do. And if people want to try politics, let them. I have a job to do, and that's working to protect the life and safety of the people I represent, not only here in this district, but across the state.
I have a comment on that.
Yeah, some of that as well.
I have been told that there is an uptick in this chemical in the water supply. I think it's responsible for us to treat that as information that we need to get out to the public, as an action plan we need to go forward with, and it's a concern. This causes cancer. We need to find out how to remove it. If there is an uptick in the water supply, then we should find out the best way to go forward to remove or filter or treat this contaminant in the water. I had a young mother look at me and say, "Is the water safe?" I'm not a scientist. I don't know the answer to that question. I'd like to get the answer to that question. I've had numerous people in the town ask me about the water. I would like to answer those questions and have answers to those questions from people with professionals.
Councilman, you are on the governing body at the time.
I am.
Why can't they ask you?
I am not a scientist. The DEP people who advise us to close wells 7 and 9 are the ones that we seek advice from, and those in our local community to find out what the best action is. That's why I say we need an action plan, and we need the action plan to go forward as soon as possible, and we need to inform the public about that. We shouldn't cancel meetings in regards to that.
Were you made aware of the denial and of the funding due to it was late?
I was made aware of that by information that was sent to me at one point. Actually, it was sent to me on October 28th. Yeah. I did not know that there
from
was
the town?
No, it was not from the town. It was from a resident who sent me information, a letter actually, that I didn't know about from the DP.
Were you surprised?
I was.
How so?
I was surprised that we had actually applied for a spill fund. I was more surprised that we'd been denied.
Wait, listen, this is an important question. One of the fundamental questions is, when you have a question of health and safety, should the lateness of an application be a reason to deny funding a process that would remove a contaminant from the drinking supply? I mean, you know, that kind of arbitrary deadline is not more important to the health and safety of residents. And we need to look at, in my view, whether or not, now, there could be a question how much funds are there. They're limited, you know, we'd love to clean up right away every Superfund site that's there. Maybe something has to wait for another funding cycle. But what I want to find out is, if there is money available there, then why would something as arbitrary as a date stop Moorestown from receiving the funding it needs to get this water cleaned up? And we need to look at that process and make sure that it's focused on public health and safety and not, you know, administrative whimsy. Let's just hope that's not the case. And indeed, looking at this whole process, again, we've known about this chemical for years, and one of the things that we should explore as this legislation makes its way through the process is, and you mentioned the word politics, were political interferences involved and not getting this chemical regulated sooner than we're attempting to do now? Was there a political reason that some of the scientific data was ignored? Maybe it's an economic reason, and that happens. People need to understand. I don't want to be. I want to be realistic. You know, we live with risk all the time. It is part and parcel of life. If we're going to produce things, some of that production may lead to products being produced in the environment that are not as healthy as we would want. And we decide as a society all the time, well, what's an acceptable limit? What negativity will we accept for the positivity that comes from production, from farmland production, from manufacturing, from having people employed, for having communities that work for the people that live there. And so there is always a balance and interplay when you're involved in a regulatory process between promoting what's good and demoting what's not good. That's not going to go away. But what I do know is that with more information, more attention to science, less political interference, and having the public involved in this weighing between the good and the bad, that will get to the right place with respect to this chemical and the many other things in our environment that we might wish to see reduced or eliminated.
I'd like to add something in relation to Moorestown. Saying it's a political thing. They discovered it in March of 2013. I don't think they have elections in March. If not only the township, but I put responsibility on the state as well, do not inform people so they can make an informed decision on whether they want to drink the water or not, whether the wells are shut or not. Hey, let people know that this chemical, we found it in the water. Here are the possible, here's the information and the research that it's a carcinogen. Let people make their own decisions. And if you don't inform the people, or at least maybe from the state's concerned, send someone from the state who's more knowledgeable to tell the people what they're drinking, and let them make the decision. And the fact in this case that no one did anything. No one told anyone. Fortunately for us, a resident here looked at it and seen it in our water report and brought it to the township's attention just most recently, this past month in September. It's a long way from March of 2013.
And of course, the larger question is should that should we have had to rely on, as we did in this case, you know, an alert resident looking through a report to bring this to the attention of the public, information out to the public as soon as they have that information, and as Mike says, let the public decide. I think that's sort of we're going to be looking at that. You know, I do think that there are reasons to be circumspect with providing information. If it's going to cause a panic, if you're not going to be able to explain it right, and you have, you know, a lot of, you know, information is not always perfectly good, but it almost always is. And so we need to make sure that we get information that people need out to them as soon as we can within the process.
I have a comment as well. We need to find out what the source point of this contaminant is. Is the source point a manufacturer of the chemical? Is the source point how it's put in the ground? We need to find those things out and go back to that source point and say, is this cause something that we can find out about and say, okay, are there responsible parties that we should look into and find out what we can talk to, how we can talk to those responsible parties, and perhaps if we have to treat, they could be the responsible parties. We can say, well, you should be contributing to that treatment.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. Thank you.